Hello, everyone. Wanted to go over the review questions for Thomas Nagel's death. Number one, according to Nagel, life is a good and death is bad. But in what sense is death's badness different from life's goodness? Let's see if we can find the part of the text that will help us the most in these questions. I think if we look at the bottom of the second page, which is the bottom of page 74, if we turn from what is good about life to what is bad about death, the case is completely different. Essentially, though there may be problems about their specification, what we find desirable in life are certain states, conditions, or types of activity. It is being alive, doing certain things, having certain experiences that we consider good. But if death is an evil, it is the loss of life, rather than the state of being dead or non existent or unconscious, that is objectionable. So there it is. The answer to that question is that what's good about life is being alive, but what's bad about death is not being dead. There's nothing bad about being dead. There's nothing at all about being dead. He is an Epicurean to that extent. What is bad about death, if indeed it is a bad, is that it represents a loss of life, which is a good. That is, death is bad, if it is bad, only because it is a loss of goods, the goods of life. So it's not inherently bad to be dead. It's not like anything to be dead, but it's perhaps inherently good to be alive. It's death is bad because it represents a loss of goods, loss of life. Number two, Nagel suggests that the key to understanding in what sense death is an evil or bad for the one who has died is time. How so? This is a difficult question. But we can find the part of the essay that deals with this on page 76 in the beginning of the last paragraph. All the questions have something to do with time. Well, how so? Um, he says there are certainly are goods and evils of a simple kind, which a person possesses at a given time, simply in virtue of his condition at that time. But this is not true of all the things we regard as good or bad for a man. I think that when he says that all the questions have something to do with time, they have to do with when something happens with reference to the person to whom it happens. Um, According to Nagel's way of thinking of things, you have to know whether something is a bad for somebody, unless it's a simple bad, again, like getting punched in the face or stubbing your toe or having a toothache. You have to have a sense of the history of that person. So that if something happens, identical thing happens to two people, but they have different histories, then it could be a bad for one person and not a bad for the other, considering and that is accounted for by their different histories. So I think when he says that all the questions have something to do with time, you have to take into account history. You have to take into account the personal history of the person. As he says here, often we need to know his history to tell whether something is a misfortune or not. It doesn't go. It's not true of all bads, all misfortunes, but it has a it's relevant to some bads. Number three, excuse me, Nagel denies the old saying that what you don't know can't hurt you. Why? Well, first of all, he doesn't believe that that's true, right? That what you don't know can't hurt you. And he's denying it for a specific reason. Now, obviously, we could have a terrible disease that's progressing and is hurting us and we don't know it, but he's not talking about situations like that. He's talking about situations in which awareness of a bad seems to be constitutive of the bad itself, but he's denying that. So when he denies the old saying that what you don't know can't hurt you, what he's saying is that, well, let's say his examples of things like deceptions or deprivations, if one is deceived by somebody else but doesn't know it, uh, Nagel denies that, therefore, it's nothing to us. Or if we are deprived of something but are not aware of the deprivation and are not affected in our happiness by the deprivation, he still considers it a kind of hurt, and he relies upon certain uh, hypotheticals, like the person whose reputation is ruined after he dies, like the person who has the traumatic brain injury. That these people have been hurt, but they're not aware that they've been hurt, and they've not been made unhappy by being hurt, but still they've been hurt, is at least Nagel's position. Number four, according to Nagel, if someone dies at 806, and that would be at 806 years old, has something bad happened to them? Why or why not? Well, I guess you, just on that much information on Nagel's theory of death, the badness of death, you wouldn't be able to tell. But someone certainly could have somebody's death at the age of 806 could be a bad. Ultimately, Nagel's idea of the badness of death relies upon the idea that death takes away possible future goods that we otherwise would have experienced had we not died. So if somebody at 806 walks in front of a bus and gets killed, but let's say they had a few years of goods left, then certainly something bad happened to them. If they died at 806 without any future goods in their, in any goods in their future, then something bad didn't happen to them. It really depends. Ultimately, Nagel's theory of death is that, again, it is the taking away of possible future goods. So if you have possible future goods and you die, then death was bad for you. If you don't have future goods, possible future goods, and you die, I don't see any basis for saying that death at any age is a bad for you. Finally, Nagel suggests a hypothetical about a man who has a brain injury. How does this hypothetical help Nagel make his main point about the badness of death? The important thing to note and to spell out in your answers, let's say on an exam or when you're writing, if you write an essay about this issue, is to make it explicit that this hypothetical about the man with a brain injury is supposed to prove something about death. And the main analogy here is that he is like the dead insofar as he has suffered a loss but is not aware of the loss. The dead have suffered a loss, but obviously, if we hold to the general Epicurean idea that the dead become nothing, they are not aware of the loss. So one could say that in both cases, um, nothing bad has happened to them. Obviously, Nagel means to argue that we all recognize that the man with the brain injury, something terrible has happened to him, even though he's not aware of it and is not suffering because of it. Similarly, once people die, we often say that something terrible happened to them, even though they're not suffering because of it and they're obviously not aware of it.